Hello and welcome back to the Arturia CMI-V tutorial series. In this episode we're going to have a deeper dive into the sampling engine itself, see some of the options available to us there. Just before we set off on that, if I can point you at the Patreon link in the description below, that's a great way to help support me and my channel. Alternatively, you can click the join button in the YouTube interface to become a channel member. I really appreciate everybody who's done that so far. It means a great deal to me. Okay, let's get on with it. I've got back to the analog section sound that we were looking at in the last episode, and once again I've muted the other sounds so that we're just hearing the bass synth. And you can see as I press play, the play bar scrolls across the sample. If I hover over this ruler at the top, I'm just clicking on the 50 here, and I'm going to click and then drag down. You can see me zooming into the wave. Now if I press a key on the keyboard now, you'll hear the sample, but you don't see any update of the user interface, and the green line that represents the current playhead on the sampler just flashes past us very quickly. If I turn the follow button on, however, it will track the sample as it plays at this zoom level. And then you can see the wave evolve. And this is where we can kind of take advantage of supervision to see the genuine oscilloscope view of the CMI. It is accurate. There's also a 3D view. Never really found much use for the 3D vision. It's very pretty, but it doesn't really tell me what's going on. You can see the wave evolving over time, and you can click in this thing and drag it left and right to view the sample, kind of isometrically. But I pretty much tend to stick to the 2D view. Now there's two different ways that we can change the sample that we're listening to. If we click the Browse button in the top tab bar, then we've got a whole host of default samples that we can select from, and you can see that pretty much, well, all of them actually are all at 1.1 seconds. So I'll just pick a random one of these. I had to double click to select the sample, and now that's been loaded into slot 1. We've got a bass sound. Now, as you can see, we've got a load of silence at the end of this sample. No problem at all. Just drag our sample endpoint in, and then it'll cut short properly rather than just holding silence open while we've got the key pressed. But we can also import any sample that we want. In the slot itself, if you click the little folder icon, I'm now browsing my PC. I can double click a wave of my choice, and now we've just loaded in this very long droning tone. And you can see that it's still subject to the same sample end, so I'll drag that all the way to the end. And now you can hear that entire sample play. Now at the beginning of this sample, got this drop out of volume, so I might choose to jump over that, just zoom into the wave and move the sample start forwards so that I jump over that point of loss of sound. Just double click in the ruler again to see the whole thing. Okay, so that's how we get samples into the engine, but what can we do with them once they're there? If we click the Edit tab, arguably the most important two things you can do to a sample are alter its sample rate and bit depth. Those are the two metrics by which a sample's quality is measured. The sample rate is how many snapshots of a sound are taken in at any given time. So at the moment, this sample rate is 14,000 snapshots per second. But we've also got a bit depth, which is like an amplitude scale. This is how many different amplitudes or volumes can be counted. At the moment, the bit depth is set to 8. If I take this all the way down to 1, you can see that the sample is either on or off, which isn't really very useful from the perspective of sampling. You're going to get a very low grade output. Now let's hear it. You can hear all of that distortion because there simply isn't enough fidelity in the bit depth to be able to accurately represent all of the different volumes that this sound occupies. You'd be surprised at how brutal you can be with the bit depth and still have a reasonably good sounding sound. So here we are down to 6 bits. We are introducing distortion. In fact, you can see it if I really zoom into the wave. You can see the degradation as we pull the bit rate down. Similarly with the sample rate, in order to see this, you really do have to zoom in quite close on the wave. Ordinarily, you use left click for large changes to a value and right click for very fine detail. For this particular control, they're the other way around. So I'm going to right click on this control, and now as I drag it down, I'm pulling down hundreds and thousands at a time. And you can see the quality of the sample go down. It's basically taking fewer snapshots. Right click, drag up. Resolution of the wave increases. There's also an auto set button, which I'll be absolutely honest with you, more often than not doesn't do anything. It seems to reduce the sample rate when it needs to be reduced in order to find the minimum headroom required to reproduce the sound, but I'm not an enormous fan of the button, I must confess. So let's just have a quick check of what we've got. Just getting us back to the analog section sound again, so that we can so that you've basically got this stuff to play with if you want. I'm going to mute the other two sounds again, so we've got the original bass synth sound. Now these two filter values here, it's called filter low. It's a low cut filter or a high pass. So ordinarily when you see the word low, you'd expect it to be a low pass filter. The logic is inverted here. What this means is if I turn this filter on, at the moment it's not doing anything. If I turn the filter all the way up, it's throwing low frequencies away or letting high frequencies through. On the other side, this is the high cut, otherwise known as low pass. And so for this filter, when it's turned all the way up, it's not doing anything, it's letting all the frequencies through. And now I'm going to start cutting high frequencies away. And we're just left with the low stuff. So it's always a little bit confusing wrapping your head around filters. You have to understand the terminology and then be able to kind of flip the logic inside your brain depending on whether it's a cut or a pass. Gain is simply sample level at the default or 0 dB. There's no boosting or attenuation. If you boost this thing too far, you'll start getting clipping and you'll see the top of the waves get cut off. There we go. As this top of the wave gets cut, you can see turning it into a square wave, that's basically clipping distortion. Now in the digital domain, this is a bad thing. You pretty much don't want that. So controlling your gains, if I double click it'll get back to 0. It's really important to make sure the wave doesn't distort unless you absolutely want it to. A couple of options. Need to just zoom out so we can see the whole wave. If I click reverse, literally plays the entire thing backwards. There's our loop. And invert, you won't really see any impact here. What it's going to do is flip the phase. So it literally turns the wave upside down. Now if a wave is playing on its own, you're not going to get any effect from that. Playing one wave in phase or out of phase has no context if it's not being compared with something else. Now I did create a small example to demonstrate phasing. What I've basically done here is loaded the same sample into slots 1 and 2. This is the base 1 sample. I'm just going to mute one of them. And we're going to have a look at the volume in Insight. So we have a true peak. Just have a look at the true peak value, minus 10.1. Now when I bring the second wave in, acoustic principles tell us that there should be a doubling of volume, which in audio terms relates to a 6 decibels increase. So we should see a true peak of minus 4.1. And there we go. So that's 2 different waves being played at the same time in phase, results in a doubling of volume. If I invert the phase of one of those waves, we get almost complete silence. The waves are cancelling each other out. That's how noise cancelling headphones work. They listen to the ambient sound of the world around you and basically play an inverted copy of that into your ears. They cancel each other out and then you stop hearing the noise of the outside world. But ordinarily, at the moment, we're dealing with a single wave, so we don't have to worry about phase. Get back to the analog section again. Nice bit of familiarity. Now the convert to synthesis options opens a whole new can of worms. So I'm going to show you the concept today, and we'll have a very brief look at what's happened, and we'll discuss it in much greater detail in the next episode because it's a really big subject. It's going to turn this sample into a wavetable. Now we have a filter value which by default is set to 2. I've turned it down to 0, which basically means it's not going to apply any filtering to the wave. The highest value of 7 throws high harmonics away. In other words, it reduces the fidelity of the sound. Down at 0, we get full reproduction. This is a mono signal, so I can leave the channel set to L, but I can set L and R if it's a stereo signal. And then I'm going to click the Analyze button, and it auto tabs us across to the second mode. This is where we enter the world of wavetable synthesis. I'll play the notes. It sounds really similar to the original sound. Here's the sample. And here's the wavetable version of it. It's really close. What's happened is that the sample's been chopped into loads of individual sine waves and all joined back together. It's a process called fast Fourier analysis. Don't particularly have to worry about how it, the maths is way beyond me, but I understand the concept. All sound in nature is built up of sine waves. And so now if we go back to the Edit tab, here are all the individual, if I scroll across these 32 slots, these are all the different harmonics, all the sine wave harmonics that comprise this sound. Now the way that the CMI's implemented synthesis is a little bit strange because it's merged or very heavily mixed together wavetable synthesis with additive synthesis, two fundamentally different approaches to the generation of sound. But in this synthesizer, they're quite heavily interrelated. That's the subject for the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Please hit the like button if you did. I'll see you next time.